As I'm recording this, I'm about to play Metroid for the first time. I've been anxiously anticipating this game's release ever since its first announcement, and now that I finally have my hands on it, a sense of worry has started manifesting within me. What if I've been excited for nothing, and I'm just gonna end up being let down again, like I did with Tales of Arise, or New the World Ends With You, or Kingdom Hearts 3? I guess the only way I can find out is by playing it. So, here goes nothing. You know, I kind of have a rough relationship with Mercury Steam. If you've seen my last video on the design philosophies of the Metroid series as a whole, which I recommend you watch before this video as it is essentially a continuation of that one, then you're no doubt aware that I don't think very highly of their Metroid 2 remake. But even before that, I've always had a negative bias against them due to the Castlevania Lords of Shadow series. My hate for that sub-series deserves an entire video on its own, but to put it bluntly, I've never held the developers in high regard. So when it was announced that they'd be co-developing the Metroid Dread, a project that was seemingly eternally lost to the cutting room floor, well, I was a tad worried to say the least. These worries subsided after seeing more of the amazing looking gameplay trailers that had been gradually coming out, but steadily, they came back as release approached. And this is precisely why, after 3 entire playthroughs and unlocking every last gallery picture, I am more than overjoyed to say that I now have a new favorite game in the franchise. Mechanically speaking, this game improves on everything the previous games had to offer, while adding new systems to spice things up. I'm someone who greatly appreciates it when new games don't simply ditch the last one's experimental ideas to play it safe, and instead expand upon them to show their true potential in a new light. And Dread does that in spades. As usual, I will avoid showing late game areas or spoilery story material. However, I will be using footage from later in the game in order to display some of the things I'll be talking about. My favorite of the new abilities has to be the slide, as it functions in much the same way as it does in the Castlevania games, allowing you to quickly get under an enemy or their attack without having to kill your momentum to enter the morph ball first. Believe me when I say this, but you will definitely be using it a lot. Another thing I thoroughly appreciated was all the small tweaks made to the mechanics from Samus Returns to have them work and feel a lot better. I honestly don't think Samus has ever felt better to control. I also hated the counter in Samus Returns, as it was one of the many things in that game that killed your flow by forcing you to stand still to use it, but not here. Being able to use it while moving not only allows you to counter enemies more efficiently, but it gives you a whole new option for quick traversal by allowing you to hit them while running. This does damage, but when they're not in a countable state, it forces the enemies to go into a short recall animation as well, that allows you to just bypass them entirely if they're not already dead. And that's great for speedrunning and other things. This is just one of the many improvements that elevate the game's sense of flow to one I have not seen from any other Metroidvania. Never at any point did I ever think to myself, man, I wish this wasn't so boring, or wow, this is a waste of time, because everything just flows perfectly. The sense of speed and fluidity is then later made even better by the addition of the new flash shift. This bastard of an ability ended up being my go-to for bosses and quickly getting across rooms, as it's essentially a teleport from one point to another that also recharges incredibly quickly. In the last video I said that Fusion's lack of control was symbolic of a build-up to a pure expression of freedom, one that Dread would have to accomplish. And while I can't say that it ever gets as open as Super, I can safely say that it's the most open we've gotten since. On my first run, I was taking my time, exploring at my leisure, and when I was comfortable with what I've gotten, I finished it. And yet my final completion rate was a mere 34%. I knew that this game was big and heavily encouraged exploration, but I never would have expected the sheer amount of detail that was put into every single corner of the map. Some of the upgrades really took me a while to find, and there were several upgrades that required precise executions of several specific shine spot techniques back to back. That took me an insane amount of attempts, but felt rewarding as all hell when I finally pulled them off. Visually speaking, the game also looks fantastic for the Switch. The individual areas are incredibly detailed and every camera angle and shot was perfectly framed. There were several points in time where I simply stood there and didn't do anything other than taking screenshots and soaking in the atmosphere. My hat's off to the art department as they absolutely killed it. I wish I could say the same about the music though. It's incredibly forgettable, almost insultingly so. which is a damn shame considering this is Metroid we're talking about. Every game has at least one song that is in some way iconic. But here, I couldn't tell you a single thing about any song. And whilst we're on the subject, let's talk about the map. Before the release I was constantly wondering whether they'd take Fusion's more stage-based structure, or the other game's more all-encompassing map. Well, Dread asks, why not both? And does exactly that. While each of the individual areas is fairly large, they're all interconnected via a large amount of teleportals that allow you to access new areas and discover even more abilities. I love this, as it not only allows the areas to properly stand out from one another on the map screen while allowing you to thoroughly comb them all, but also means that you'll never be sitting in any given area for too long until you choose to move on. You're constantly traveling between areas, soaking in the atmosphere, getting stronger, and feeling ever more powerful along the way. It also helps in aiding the narrative that you're on an alien planet and trying to escape by making it so that you're never getting too accustomed to an area, as you're always looking for any way and any tool you can get your hands on, even if said hunt ends up sending you in circles, because the exit will never be the same. It's great, aiding in the feeling of helplessness that the game wants you to feel, or your AI partner Adam, who returns from Fusion and is essentially a hint system that really loves to remind Samus that you're defenseless, and he's kind of a lot more of a dick than he was before, as well as the new big mechanic that they've been teasing and talking about for the entirety of the promotional material. The emmis. These bastards are terrifying. You wouldn't think it judging by their design, but they truly do the game's title justice. They will hunt you down relentlessly, and getting caught will almost surely result in your death. All of them have distinctive traits that make them harder than the last, ranging from simply being a lot faster than you, to freezing you in place on sight, and you can't even defeat or hurt them until you haven't gotten a very specific upgrade that disappears after you killed an emmi, so your only option is to run and hide, which is far easier said than done. On top of that, Adam also loves to remind you that you're helpless, and that your only chance of survival is to accept said helplessness. And yet, despite being relegated to the designated areas, the emmi still managed to feel like a fully realized version of Fusion's SAX, though I couldn't help but be a little disappointed that they weren't used as much as I'd hoped they would. Even Samus has a lot more of a personality now than she ever did before, despite saying next to nothing throughout the entire game. Dread has an incredibly cinematic approach to storytelling, despite there very rarely ever being spoken a word, aside from Adam's briefings. Samus's movements and actions in these cutscenes, as well as the grab states and bosses, are fast, precise, and aggressive. She's the spitting image of an action hero, shooting enemies in their weak points without even needing to look, or pulling some extremely skillful maneuvers that really hammer in the fact that you're in fact playing as the strongest bounty hunter in the galaxy, and she's not going down without a fight. Now you might be wondering how and if this ties back to the feeling of control that I established in the last video, as well as defining Dread's core design philosophy, and well, I believe both of those things can be answered at the same time. Samus, and by extension the player, are already in control. You're not following orders or some marker telling you where to go, and you're not even given any general direction to follow like in Zero Mission, but instead, you simply push forward. The game actively encourages and rewards you for going out of your way to forge your own path and sequence break. My favorite example for this has to be the Kraid insta-kill. After getting the Varia suit, you can perform a series of skillful jumps in order to get both the grapple beam and the morph bombs early. Naturally, this is cool because it allows you to get certain upgrades earlier, but it also allows you to instantly kill Kraid, the second main boss of the game, after entering his second phase. The entire game is full of things like these, and new sequence breaks are being found by the day. The efforts of this community are insane, and it truly shows that both the developers knew and wanted people and players to attempt things like these, and actively support it. To put it bluntly, Dread truly is a pure expression of control and freedom, and a perfect payoff for the build-up that was Fusion. But naturally, that isn't all that formed the game's core. The secondary main element that forms Metroid 5's core is perfectly contained within its subtitle: Dread. The atmosphere all throughout is oppressive, almost Metroid 2-like in its nature. The music, being silent and subdued, often plays in its favor, aiding in creating a rather unwelcoming atmosphere. The game is also significantly harder than any other game in the series, and the emmy's relentless pursuit keeps you on edge for the game's entire runtime. They give me the same feeling as the original Clock Tower, funnily enough. Near pure silence as you explore and try to find an exit, and all of a sudden, you're spotted. The music starts. You can't simply escape them by leaving the area. You have to run and find a place to hide. The tension of being hidden in a corner with your phantom cloak and praying that it won't run out before the enemy retreats is incredible. And up until the very final moments of the game, constantly manages to pull the wool over your eyes and surprise you in new ways. This goes both for the emmys, the story, and the gameplay as a whole. Metroid Dread is an absolutely phenomenal game, and I would almost go as far as to call it a masterpiece within the Metroidvania genre. Mercury's team may just have redeemed themselves in my eyes. And with the game's overwhelming financial success, it looks like the series is finally back and here to stay. The fact that it really does seem like Metroid has a bright future ahead of itself, that makes me happy. It almost gives me hope that we one day may just get a new Castlevania. But until then, I ask of you, if you own a Switch or possess any other means of playing this game, then please, play Metroid Dread. I promise that you won't regret it. Cheers, and do me a favor here. Have a fantastic day.